Hello, everyone. Once again, joining us, Tame Type 1. Today, we have Maggie joining us. Go ahead and give us your story, Maggie. When were you diagnosed with diabetes?
I was diagnosed about 14 years ago when I turned 21. And I was originally diagnosed type 2 and took about 9 months to a year before the doctors figured out that that probably wasn't actually the case. And they checked it out and figured out that I was actually a type 1 and got switched over to some insulin instead of oral meds, which worked a lot better.
So, at first, when you were diagnosed, they didn't even know you were type 1. They thought you were type 2.
Yeah.
Like,
Yep.
seems like it's pretty common, unfortunately. And
I
when
think
you,
it's more common when
when,
you're older.
yeah, when they realized you were type 1, how'd they tell you to manage it? Obviously, insulin, but anything else?
Yeah. Um, well, I started on a pump right away. My dad had was a type 1 for other reasons, and so I was able to get started on a pump right away. And I remember them telling me that you have to do a trial period when you're trying to set up your basal rates and everything. And their suggestion was to start out with 200 carbs a day. And I remember just thinking that was ludicrous because I didn't eat that many carbs to start with, and I could not figure out how I was going to pack that much food into a typical day because that was the bare minimum they wanted you to keep with.
Yikes. So they didn't have a carb max, they had a carb minimum.
Yeah. Yep.
Did you
Lots of
follow
oatmeal.
that?
I did for a while because I didn't know any better. Well, a long time actually, 13 years. Because I didn't know any better. So I tried to stick with it. I probably didn't. I stopped counting after a while just because it didn't really make a difference. But I didn't go low carb until about a year ago this month.
Well, that's fantastic. So for 13 years, you're doing 200 grams of carbs a day, or
Well,
at
probably.
least.
Yep.
How was managing that like?
It was really tough. I had a really lots of really high highs and a decent amount of lows. To be in the 400 range wasn't uncommon and really didn't phase me too much. But there wasn't anything that I felt I could do about it. And I was taking massive amounts of insulin. I probably used close to 150 units a day in my pump, which gets really pricey. So it was just a constant roller coaster, and I constantly felt pretty crappy.
And you were averaging, we're not averaging, but you're getting up to 400s and not worrying much about it.
No, it
I
when your body's used to it, you just don't notice.
I know what that's like, unfortunately.
Yep.
And how much were you spending on insulin per month doing this?
Uh, Cost me about probably close to $300 just for the insulin.
And that's with insurance and everything else, right?
That's with insurance and with the lovely discount card that the insurance company or that the insulin company sends you. So
Those are a blessing, honestly. Guys, if you don't know about those discount cards, read up on them. They're amazing. Came out just here for
and there's
10
a
bucks.
cheat. If you only get 2 vials at a time, you can get it filled multiple times in a month. It saves you a whole lot more. Fun fact.
Having to take that much insulin, I bet you'd figure that out pretty quickly, huh?
You do. You have to get 4 vials a month. Blow through it fast.
For your 13 years where you're, how high were your blood sugars getting? Like, what was your A1C like back then?
My A1C bounced between, sometimes it was 7 if I was lucky. It was usually closer to 9-ish, 8 or 9. Super frustrating. My doctors were always frustrated, but never really had any suggestions. So I just got old and to the point where I just stopped going because there wasn't really a benefit to being told that I wasn't doing a good job, but not have any suggestions to tell me what I should do to do a good job. So,
Did you sort of give up at any point?
yeah, I did much better. I have 2 kids. I did much better when I was pregnant with both of my kids. Um, because I don't really know why. I clearly ate less carbs, but I'm not really sure that I paid much attention to it. Um, Probably just the only thing that I could stomach without throwing up everywhere. But otherwise, I would go my once a year to get my prescriptions, kind of suck up the fact that my doctor was going to get on my case, and then leave. And the most frustrating part was I would do Weight Watchers and all sorts of different things that they had suggested, and I would lose weight and nothing would happen with my blood sugars. So it was just really frustrating.
You say you tried Weight Watchers. Was it like a specific diet?
It is. It was. They've had a bunch of different ones. The most recent one they've had is where you can eat all the fruits and vegetables you want, which was appealing because I liked fruit. So I think at one point I was eating like 6 or 7 oranges a day. I lost a lot of weight. It really didn't help my blood sugars a whole lot.
So typical low fat kind of stuff, and it just didn't help at all.
No, nope, not at all.
Unfortunately, I never went down that road, but struggle to want to know what that's like. Anyways, so again, 13 years having high blood sugars, having a pretty high A1C. How are you feeling during this whole time?
Pretty crappy. I had some pretty nasty joint pain. And then finally figured out that I had gastroperesis. So eating was kind of a chore, and they wanted me to eat a lot of high fiber, and low fat to fix that. And it didn't fix that. I think it just made it worse. So just a lot more kind of what felt like, ramming my head into a wall with not a whole lot of solutions. So
you kept coming in, you kept having problems, the doctors just tell you the same exact stuff they've always tell you, and nothing gets better.
Yeah, pretty much. And we only have one endocrinology group in our town, so they kind of run the show, which is unfortunate.
I find the whole idea of using fiber to treat gut problems so strange. It's like the one thing you can't digest, and that is going to absolutely be going through your gut. You don't want more of that. I don't know.
No.
I don't understand the reasoning at all. But anyways, so you had you had gastroparesis, joint pain. Were there any other complications you had to deal with?
No, luckily I didn't have any other ones. Not that they probably weren't coming down the road, but I was lucky, and those are the only kind of 2 issues that I've had.
Good. So a year ago comes around, right?
Yep.
How'd you find out about low carb?
I actually had a friend who was doing a keto diet, and I remember telling her, like, we can't do that because they tell you that it's super dangerous for diabetics to do a keto diet. And so I just kind of let it off. And then she had lost a ton of weight, and she went from being pre-diabetic to not diabetic. And so I was like, well, maybe it's worth a shot. So I talked to somebody else just online that I didn't even know, and asked if there were any suggestions for doing Weight Watchers and low carb, which is not actually possible. And she recommended Dr. Bernstein's book. And so I was like, I don't know. The title of it kind of sounds like a gimmick. And she's like, well, why don't you read it and see what you think? And I think it was like the first chapter. And I was like, this makes total sense. This is clearly what we should be doing instead of the alternative. So from day one, I switched it all over, and it's been super, super easy from there. Well, management wise.
It's too simple to not make sense. It's carbs raise blood sugar, avoid carbs. What? Why did I think of that?
I know. I like science. Science makes sense.
I was so surprised after 16 years of diabetes, I did not ever even consider that basic fact.
Right?
Like, you just never put two together. It's ridiculous.
I mean, it occurred to me in the very beginning, but they were so adamant that I needed the carbs that I just was like, all right, well, clearly I'm missing something, because they seem to think that that's important.
That's the worst part of it, man. But
right?
So you go low carb, you make the switch. How are you doing now doing that?
It's going really, really well. I started it. So actually, when I started, I was on a trial for a different insulin pump. So I was getting paid to try out this insulin pump. So when I started, my A1C, I think, was 9.1. And then within 3 months, it dropped down to 5.5. And I kind of got stuck with their auto loop system. Didn't work. So I actually just ended up dropping the trial because it wasn't worth it to stay there. And then since then, I've been able to get it down to about 4.8 or 4.7. pretty continuously. So it's amazing how fast it worked and how easy it's really been. And I think the biggest part of making it easy is, in the book, he talks about how carbs and sugar for some people can be like alcohol to an alcoholic. And for me, that's totally the case. I can't cheat on that, because if I eat one sugar cookie, whatever, I'll eat the whole bag. And so the biggest thing for me is that since I started, I just haven't cheated, and it's not an option. So it's not like a fall off the wagon, like I had a cheat day thing, because I know that from personal experience that will not work. It's hard with family. Obviously, my kids don't really eat. They eat lower carb, but we don't restrict a ton. My husband's kind of transferred over, but outside events are a little more difficult. And the one thing I have noticed is the longer that I've been doing it, the more difficult those things get. So in the beginning, if I ate something that had sugar in it unknowingly, right, like a marinade or something weird, I didn't have the same insulin sensitivity and the same reaction that I do now. So now it's a lot more obvious if I eat something that I shouldn't be eating than it was to start with. So that's kind of thrown a wrench into things. But still, I mean, that'll make my sugar go to 130 instead of 400. So still a huge win.
Absolutely. I've always said, and I don't remember what his quote came from, maybe it was something Bernstein said, but it's always better to go 100% than 99%. It's so much easier to cut that last little percent out and just go all the way with it, because that 1% is going to be a constant temptation for you.
It is, and I do not have that self-control.
Most people don't think they do until they fail.
No. Yeah, not even worth it for me.
I understand 100%. And just on the part about being less tolerant to carbs, I'm still very sensitive to insulin, I find, but it's just when it comes to carbohydrates in particular, they'll raise my blood sugar more. So
yep.
I don't call myself less insulin sensitive, because my basal rate's actually lower than it was before, and we'll talk about that in a second. More that I'm just carb or sugar intolerant is no way to put it. Your body's just not used to it anymore. I think it's completely fine as long as you aren't eating a ton of it.
Nope.
Anyways, let's go into insulin, because I remember reading about this. How much insulin were you taking before you went low carb?
I used to take about 150 units a day was kind of the average. Sometimes less, obviously, sometimes more. And it was never a big deal. I remember thinking, I'd have to do a correction, or if my pump was out and I had to do an injection or whatever, taking 25 units at a time was not even a thing. Like, it didn't matter. That's just what I did to correct whatever. I was so insulin resistant. I think I probably could have taken 50 units at a time and not noticed any huge change. And then since switching over, I've dropped down to, on average, I still use a pump. So I use about 45 units in my pump a day, and then maybe 10 units of R, because I bolus R for meals. So I've cut it in a third since then. And it just occurred to me the other day, it was needed a syringe for fast acting. The sickness, whatever, ran through our house. And I remember grabbing an older syringe and thinking to myself, I can't use this because it doesn't have small enough markings. Like, I cannot give myself 5 units of insulin. I will be dead on the floor. And how odd of a shift that was from where before, it was at a minimum of 10 per time. Like, I didn't think anything of taking 10 units. And now I'm like, I got to find some smaller syringes so I can do 1 unit, which is really nice. And also saves me a crap ton of money.
Let's talk about that real quick. So you went down about 100 units a day, almost.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And, I mean, just 10 days is a full vial, right? So that's getting pretty expensive pretty fast. How much were you spending before insulin before versus now?
So before I spent about $300-ish a month. And now I might spend 50. Probably, I would have to calculate it out. I don't always use a full bottle in a month. I definitely don't use a full bottle of R in a month. that takes me about 2 or 3 months to finish off. So it's probably maybe $50 a month.
Wow.
Which is obviously a huge savings.
That's amazing.
It is. It's really nice.
And are you using R in your pump?
No, I use Novolog in my pump.
Okay.
At some point, I would like to switch to R in my pump. I just haven't made the switch yet. It would make sense. Mentally, I'm just having a hard time getting there because the Novolog is working so well.
Hey, so, if it works, you know, if it's not broken, don't fix it. The way I see it.
Exactly. And it doesn't, at this point, it doesn't save me a ton of money, so it's not a huge deal breaker. But
good. Well, good.
Nice to know it's an option.
That's amazing. I mean, A1C of 4. That's better than I'm doing right now, even honestly. That is amazing that you're doing so well. How are you feeling now that you've actually got your blood sugar under control?
I feel a lot better. I think the crappy part at first was, and it sounds like this is pretty common, but I think as my body was adjusting, my joint pain got significantly worse for a while. And I think it took probably 3 to 4 months for that to really ease up, which was kind of discouraging. But it's gotten a lot better now. The biggest thing is I definitely don't have the issues with gastroperesis anymore, which is either because I'm not eating nearly as much fiber, which is a possibility, or just because the nerve damage has kind of helped to reverse itself. I could go back and get it checked, but the hospital in the area will only do the test with oatmeal. And I don't see that going very well.
No.
So I feel like I'm doing just fine without it. But overall, it's helped a ton. I don't have nearly the amount of stomach issues that I did before, and my joints have gotten a lot better. They still have a ways to go, but at least I can tell they're getting better. So
that's great to hear.
Yeah.
And how good are you keeping your blood sugars? Like, oh no. Here's what I want to ask. So you got your A1C down to 4.7. What'd your doctor think about this?
My doctor was mad. I was super bummed. I was going in, and I didn't think they'd be super excited about it anyway. They were the ones who said that you can't do a low-carb diet. So I wasn't expecting them to be, I guess, elated that I had changed. But the last time I had seen her, my A1C was 9. So I was thinking she's got to be happy that I knocked it down, right?
You think?
And the only thing, when she showed me what it was, I was like, oh, that's awesome. And she was like, no, that is way too low. It needs to be at least 6. And I was like, oh, I don't think it needs to be 6. She's like, well, if it's that low, you could die. I looked at her. I was like, die of what? She's like, you could die from hypoglycemia and ketoacidosis. I was like, well, I'm not in, I don't have ketoacidosis, so that's probably not going to kill me. And I don't really ever go that low. And that's the real benefit, is that even if I do go low, it is so gradual that it really is negligible. I mean, if I hit 50, it takes me a good 3 hours to get there. So it's not ever to the point where it drops so fast that I'm in danger. And 9 times out of 10, even if it is 50, it picks itself right back up again. So I rarely have to treat for lows anymore. And my standard deviation is only about 18. So it's clearly not jumping up and down and up and down and up and down. But she didn't really seem to care. So I kind of left devastated. I was pretty bummed. I was like, I worked my butt off to do something that you couldn't fix. And I fixed it, and you still don't think it's okay. So it's unfortunate. The other doctor, she's our nurse practitioner. So the doctor I see isn't a huge fan, but he doesn't mind it. He likes the results. He still is relatively uneducated about it, but at least he's not a jerk about it. But we don't get to pick, and we usually have to see the nurse practitioner. So I get to see her here in another, I think, 2 weeks. We'll see how that goes.
I've noticed that the less educated ones actually are more tolerant to it, which is so backwards to me, honestly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I asked her, I said, well, haven't you seen the studies about a higher A1C causing heart damage and risk for heart attacks? And she said, no, I don't think that's actually true. Like,
really?
I think at the next appointment, I'm going to bring some research your way.
I'll send you some links, because we have a ton.
Gets me. I don't understand how we diagnose Yeah, well, and I don't understand why we diagnose people as pre-diabetic at 5.8, and that's a cause for alarm to start medication, but we don't want people to be below 5.8. Like if 5.8 is kind of that like turning point where you're in for bad health, why do I want to stay above that? Is completely obnoxious to me.
Yeah, if a doctor's telling a type 2 diabetic, hey, you need to get your, hey, you're about to have pre-diabetes, you're about to have actual diabetes, you need to do something about this. Why is it an issue to have an A1C under 6 for them, but it's an issue for us if we have an A1C under 6? It's like, oh
Exactly.
my god.
Don't get it at all.
It's hard for me not to put my tinfoil hat on sometimes with this stuff. Honestly, there's no
Right?
good explanation
I'm
for
not
it.
usually much of a conspiracy theorist, but sometimes when I go, I just wonder.
So, I'm glad you got such good control. What exactly are you eating now?
I eat a lot of meat and cheese. I stay away from fruit. And again, it's that whole reason. I know some people have success with strawberries and blueberries, but if I eat some blueberries, I'd probably eat the whole container of blueberries, which wouldn't end well. I can occasionally make like a keto blueberry muffin because I don't have the whole container of blueberries to eat, and that works well. But usually we just eat a lot of meat and green veggies if possible. And then I did find a recipe that makes really good low carb, no sugar granola. So I usually eat that for breakfast. It's quite tasty.
That's fantastic. I think it's really important to just know yourself. I mean, there's a
Mm-hmm.
lot of people they'll do low carb. They'll allow like the fake breads, the
Mm-hmm.
berries, all of it. And
Yep.
the thing is, you can go overboard with that stuff real easily. And
Yep.
it happened to me when I first started it. Honestly, I was
Mm-hmm.
clowning in on those almonds and peanut butter like mad. Even though it's
Yep.
technically low carb, I didn't
Yep.
understand that you still have to know your limits. And it's good to
Yep.
see you
I
found
cannot do
yours.
almonds because I could eat the whole container of almonds and
Yep,
that never ends well. And
exactly.
Lily's chocolate chips. I can't do those either.
I'm finding out that I need to like stress a limit with the Rebel ice cream because Kroger recently got it in the store near me now, so I gotta like be real
We have it
careful.
here, and it's hard to not eat a whole pint.
Uh,
Like, I don't need any insulin if I eat half of the pint, but it's so hard to stop at half of a pint because it's delicious.
know yourself. It's very important.
Exactly. Exactly.
All right, so you're feeling a lot better now. You're doing a lot better now. Is there anything else that changed from when you were high carb to now that you're low carb?
Um, not a ton. I mean, it's I just have more energy, which is nice. Um, because I don't have to bounce all over the place, so I don't have that up down where you're exhausted and wired and just kind of feel really crappy all the time. I don't think I realized how crappy I felt because that was just normal for me at the time. But anyone with a blood sugar of 400 is probably not going to feel the best. Um, so the energy has really helped quite a bit. Otherwise, I'm just not as hungry all the time, which is really nice. I think people don't realize how eating carbs just makes you want more carbs. And I think the biggest thing that I was really worried about when I switched over was, what do you do when you treat a low? Because I was one of those people who, if my blood sugar would tank, because when it's 400 and you take 50 units of insulin, at some point you're going to drop. You'd get the munchies out of your mind, and I'd sit down here and I'm like, I need 7 juice boxes and all of the candy in my kitchen. And so my worry was, well, if I'm really trying to stay away from sugar and my blood sugar goes low, what am I going to do when I need to raise my blood sugar without going overboard? And I was pleasantly surprised. When you don't tank that hard, you don't get that insatiable appetite to eat all the sugar in sight. And so it really wasn't the issue that I thought it was going to be. So I can eat a jelly bean and be just fine. It's not a big deal. And that was actually another funny part, is I realized that I only need to eat a jelly bean. I don't need to eat, 6 glucose tablets to recover from 50 units of insulin. So it's just been interesting to kind of learn how your body works. Whereas before I really didn't pay any attention to it.
I see. Yeah, I like that too. I only need a one glucose tab to
Hmm.
get back up to normal.
Yep.
Works really well. Is there anything else you'd like to add?
Um, Not specifically, just really, I think the big thing is if you're nervous, because I mean, it's a huge change to make, and it is not a societal change. I mean, it's not one that's accepted by our doctors. It's not one that even, I mean, within the diabetic community, the majority of people think is crazy. And so, but it's definitely worth the change. And so I think if you're kind of on the edge, at least try it. Give it a couple months because really it does. I mean, it changed my life. And I remember reading one of the statistics about type 1 diabetics having, I think it's 15-year shorter life expectancy than everyone else. I have 2 kids at home. That puts my life expectancy in my 60s, which means I might get to see them graduate from high school. And that just wasn't something that I wanted to do. I want to be around for my kids. I want to be around for my family. And when I'm around, I want to be healthy. I don't want to be 60 years old, blind, and missing a foot, which is probably the direction I was headed in. So, just one of those things where at some point you just have to measure, are you going to stick with the status quo of you're a diabetic, this is just how it is, and complications are inevitable, or actually do something about it and avoid those things? And obviously I picked to avoid those things, and so far it seems to be going really well.
That's a great way to end it, and I agree 100% with that. We'll leave it there. Keep those words in mind. It is 100% worth it, even if it seems scary, even if the doctors aren't always on your side. You want to live a long life, and nothing is a better motivation than having kids that you want to see grow up and live happy lives themselves. But we'll end it there. Thank you so much for your time today, Maggie. I really appreciate it.
No problem. Thank you.
You have a wonderful day, everyone. This is Maggie's story. This is how Maggie tamed her type 1.